Hi, welcome channel. Today's story is about Emma, who gave up everything for her mother but faced a shocking betrayal. What she did next will surprise you. Stay tuned. Emma Carter stared blankly at her phone screen, her heart pounding harder with each passing second. She was sitting alone in a quiet hotel room in Dallas, Texas, fresh from a long day at a tech conference she had been excited to attend. Yet all her excitement had evaporated the moment the message from her cousin, Chloe Myers, popped up. "Emma, I'm so sorry. You need to see this." Below the message was a link to Chloe's latest livestream. Out of curiosity and growing concern, Emma had clicked it, only to be met with the sound of her mother's familiar voice, sharp and bitter, echoing through the speakers. There was Linda Carter, sitting comfortably at Aunt Lisa's dining table in San Antonio, sipping a glass of wine, completely unaware that her casual cruelty was being broadcast to Chloe's growing online audience. "Emma, please," her mother scoffed, waving her hand as if the mention of her daughter was laughable. "She thinks working with tech startups makes her successful? She couldn't even finish nursing school. Now she's just floating around like some pathetic failure, clinging to those freelance jobs like they're real work." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She tightened her grip on the phone, as if holding it harder would make the words stop, but they didn't. "Honestly, I don't know why she even bothers," Linda continued, her voice laced with contempt. "She was supposed to take care of me. But instead, she runs off to play with websites and apps. A waste of time if you ask me." Laughter rippled around the table, her Aunt Lisa, Uncle Rob, and a few other relatives, chuckling as if they weren't talking about a woman who had given up everything for her mother. Emma felt her stomach twist painfully. The worst part wasn't just hearing her mother mock her career, but knowing how much she'd sacrificed to care for Linda after her rheumatoid arthritis diagnosis. 5 years ago, Emma had been thriving, a top student in her nursing program, halfway to earning her RN license, with dreams of working in emergency medicine. Then came the devastating call. Her mother had collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital. The diagnosis was brutal, aggressive rheumatoid arthritis that would require lifelong treatment, expensive medications, and constant care. Emma didn't hesitate. She put her life on hold, dropping out of nursing school to support Linda. But becoming a full-time caregiver wasn't sustainable financially. So she pivoted to the only career flexible enough to pay the bills: freelance tech consulting for startups in Austin. With her sharp mind and relentless work ethic, she quickly built a steady list of clients, but almost every dollar she earned went to her mother's medical expenses. Over the years, Emma had paid over $120 out of her own pocket for treatments, insurance premiums, and medications. She had argued with insurance companies, handled appointment scheduling, and stayed up countless nights worrying about how to make ends meet. None of that mattered now. It seemed, to Linda, her daughter was a disappointment, a failure, whose sacrifices were invisible and unappreciated. Emma's throat tightened as the video continued. "She used to talk about being a nurse," Linda sneered, "but I guess she just didn't have what it takes. Now she thinks being some kind of computer helper makes her special." Another round of chuckles from the family table, as though her struggles were a joke to them. Emma's hands trembled as she paused the video. Her pulse was roaring in her ears. For years, she had told herself that her mother's sharp tongue was just a result of pain or frustration from her illness. She excused Linda's dismissive remarks, believing that deep down, her mother knew how much she was doing. But this wasn't just a stray comment, this was who her mother truly was. Speaking freely, surrounded by family who seemed to agree. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Chloe. "I'm so sorry. Emma, I didn't know she was going to say all that. I can take the video down if you want." Emma stared at the message, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to scream, to cry, to hide, but a different part, a stronger part, began to stir within her. A part that was done pretending. Slowly, she typed back, "No. Leave it up. I need to show you something when I get back." As she hit send, Emma leaned back against the headboard of her hotel bed, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. But these were not just tears of sadness. They were tears of realization, of awakening. She had given up 5 years of her life, her career, her education, her future, for a woman who saw her as nothing more than a tool to be used and discarded. The weight of that betrayal settled on her chest. But beneath it, something new began to rise, a quiet, fierce determination. Emma wiped her face and glanced at her laptop bag lying on the chair. Inside was a meticulously organized folder labeled Mom Medical, filled with every bill, receipt, and record of payments she had made over the years. She had kept them for taxes and accountability. But now they felt like evidence of a life she had poured into someone who would never be grateful. And for the first time in years, Emma Carter knew she had to choose herself. Tomorrow, she would drive back to Austin, back to her life, to her future. And when she got home, she would finally do what she should have done long ago, take her life back. The drive back to Austin from Dallas was a blur for Emma Carter. Her thoughts spinning in a relentless loop that she couldn't quiet. As the city skyline finally came into view, she realized she had no memory of the past 3 hours beyond the weight pressing on her chest. Parking in front of her small apartment, she sat in her car for a long time, the engine idling as she stared blankly ahead, her mind torn between anger, sadness, and disbelief. After all she had done, the years of sacrifice, the countless nights staying up late to finish client work after spending hours on the phone with doctors and insurance companies, her mother had still seen her as nothing but a disappointment. A failure. The word felt like a stone in her stomach. Emma leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes as if shutting out the world could quiet the ache in her chest. When her mother had first been diagnosed, Emma had dropped everything without question. She could still remember that awful night in the hospital, the smell of disinfectant and the harsh overhead lights, when Linda had looked at her with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I don't know what I'll do if you don't help me." It had never been a question in Emma's mind. She had loved her mother. Despite her sharp edges and critical comments, her mother had worked hard as a teacher to raise her alone after her father died when Emma was still a teenager. Emma had always believed that sacrifice for family was natural, expected, so she had paused her nursing degree, thinking it would only be temporary, just until her mother's condition stabilized. But temporary had turned into 5 long years, and every time Emma thought of going back to school, there had been another crisis, a new medication, an insurance fight, a specialist who wouldn't see Linda without an outrageous upfront fee. What stung most wasn't just her mother's cutting words, but the realization that Linda had never acknowledged any of it, never once said thank you or expressed real appreciation. If anything, she had treated Emma's help as something owed to her, as if Emma had no right to expect gratitude. And now, hearing Linda mocking her as if she were a joke to the entire family who laughed along with her, felt like a slap to every sacrifice Emma had made. She thought about the relationships she had let fade away, friends she stopped seeing because she couldn't leave her mother alone for too long. Men she had dated briefly but pushed away because she didn't have room in her life for anything beyond work and caregiving. She thought about the dream of becoming a nurse, a dream she had nurtured since childhood, now collecting dust because she had told herself her mother came first. Emma's fingers tightened on the steering wheel as a wave of anger surged through her, anger at herself as much as at her mother. How had she let this happen? How had she given so much to someone who saw her as nothing more than a burden to ridicule behind her back? Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to breathe deeply, pushing back the tears that threatened again. Sitting there, in the quiet of her car, Emma began to see the truth she had been avoiding. Her mother didn't value her sacrifices. And maybe never had. And all the excuses Emma had made, that Linda was just bitter from the pain of her illness. That she didn't mean what she said. That she was just frustrated, crumbled under the weight of that realization. A voice inside her, soft but firm, began to whisper, "You have to stop. You can't live like this anymore." Emma's gaze drifted to her apartment window, where a stack of unopened nursing textbooks still sat on her desk, books she had bought months ago when she had dared to dream of reapplying to nursing school. Only to shelve that dream once more when Linda had needed a new treatment. What if she didn't shelve it this time? What if she chose herself instead? The thought scared her, after so many years of defining herself by her mother's needs, but it also filled her with a sense of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. As Emma finally turned off her car and stepped out into the cool night air, she realized something else. She wasn't just angry, she was done. Done sacrificing her life for someone who didn't appreciate it. Done shrinking herself to fit into her mother's shadow. It was time, she thought, to stop waiting for her mother's approval and start living for herself. Tomorrow, she would gather the records she had kept so carefully, meet Chloe, and begin taking back her life, one decision at a time. The next afternoon, Emma sat at a corner table of the Maple Leaf Cafe, nervously tapping her fingers against her coffee cup as she waited for Chloe. The little cafe in downtown Austin was always busy on weekends, filled with students hunched over laptops and couples chatting over lattes. But Emma barely noticed the usual background noise. Her thoughts were too loud, swirling around everything she had heard. Everything she had realized the night before. When Chloe finally arrived, her bright blue hair and oversized hoodie made her easy to spot. The moment she caught sight of Emma, her face filled with guilt and worry. And she rushed over, sliding into the seat across from her. "Emma, I'm so sorry," Chloe blurted before Emma could say a word. "I had no idea Aunt Linda would say those things. I was just doing my usual stream. I swear if I'd known she was going to trash you like that, I would have stopped her. I should have stopped her." Emma offered a small, tired smile, but there was no anger in her expression, only a deep sadness. "I know, Chloe, I don't blame you. Honestly, if you hadn't streamed it, I might have gone on like nothing was wrong for years." She paused, searching Chloe's face. "So, thank you. You showed me the truth." Chloe blinked, clearly surprised. "Thank me? But Emma, she said awful things about you. Everyone at that dinner just laughed. It wasn't right." Emma nodded, her throat tight. "I know, and that's why I asked you to leave the video up. I've spent so long pretending like it was okay, making excuses for her. But after hearing that, I realized I've been holding up her whole world, financially, emotionally, and she doesn't even respect me for it." With a deep breath, Emma reached into her bag and pulled out the thick folder labeled Mom Medical, filled with carefully documented receipts, medical bills, insurance letters, and payment records, the paper trail of her sacrifices. She slid it across the table to Chloe, who opened it and began leafing through the contents, her eyes widening with each page. "Emma, this is thousands of dollars," Chloe whispered, stunned. "You've been paying for all of this? All on your own?" Emma nodded quietly. "About $120 over the last 5 years. Every time Mom needed a new medication or treatment her insurance wouldn't cover. I figured it out. I picked up extra work. Took on more clients. I haven't had a real break in years." Chloe looked up from the papers, her eyes blazing now, not with guilt, but with anger. "And she calls you a failure? After you gave up everything for her? That's beyond messed up." Emma gave a small, sad laugh. "Yeah, it is." She paused, then sat up straighter, as if making the decision final by saying it out loud. "That's why I'm done, Chloe. I'm taking my name off her accounts. I'm not paying another bill. Not making another phone call to her doctors. I'm taking my life back. I've already started my application to go back to nursing school." Chloe's expression shifted from shock to fierce support. "Good. You should. You deserve to live your life. Emma, you've done more than enough." Emma smiled for the first time in days, a real smile. Small but full of resolve. "It's scary, but I know it's time. I'm done letting her drain the life out of me. It's my turn now." Chloe reached across the table, squeezing Emma's hand. "Whatever you need, I'm here. And if anyone gives you crap about it, I've got that video ready to go if you ever want to show them what she really thinks." For the first time in years, Emma felt seen, understood, and not alone. She wasn't sure exactly what came next. But as she left the cafe with Chloe, a quiet sense of strength settled in her chest. She was finally ready to choose herself, and that was a beginning. The next morning, Emma sat at her dining table, which was now covered in paperwork, her laptop open and glowing in the early sunlight. The folder she had shown Chloe, her silent record of 5 years of sacrifice, was now fully spread out in front of her, ready to serve a new purpose. With her heart pounding but her mind clear, Emma began making calls she had dreaded for years but now knew were necessary. The first was to her mother's insurance company, where she calmly explained to the representative, "I need to remove myself as the guarantor on Linda Carter's account. I will no longer be responsible for her medical expenses." There was a pause on the other end. And Emma could almost hear the confusion in the woman's voice as she said, "Ma'am, if you do that, her premiums will increase significantly. Are you sure you want to proceed?" Emma swallowed the lingering guilt but kept her voice steady. "Yes, please proceed. I'd like a formal letter sent to her address explaining the changes." As the woman confirmed the changes, Emma leaned back in her chair, feeling a small wave of relief, like a crack in the wall that had held her captive for so long. But there was more to do. Next, she began drafting an email that made her stomach twist with nerves but also brought a strange sense of empowerment. The email was addressed to the entire family: Aunt Lisa, Uncle Rob, Aunt Carol, and even a few cousins she rarely spoke to. "Dear family," she began, her fingers shaking slightly as she typed, "I want to let you all know that as of this month, I will no longer be responsible for managing my mother's medical care or covering her expenses. Over the past 5 years, I have spent more than $120 supporting her, including paying for treatments, medications, and insurance when her coverage fell short. I am sharing this not for pity, but for transparency, since many of you may not have known the full extent of what I've taken on alone." She paused, rereading the words, then continued, "Attached, you'll find a detailed breakdown of what I have provided. In case anyone wishes to assist her moving forward, please understand, this decision was not made lightly, but it is necessary for my well-being." Emma attached the spreadsheet she had so carefully organized, every payment, every appointment logged, and stared at the screen for a long moment before hitting send. As the email whooshed off into cyberspace, Emma sat back and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her phone buzzed almost immediately, and Emma braced herself. As she suspected, the first responses were angry, shocked, and defensive. "What do you mean you're walking away from your mother?" Aunt Lisa fired off, followed quickly by Uncle Rob's terse, "Emma, this isn't right. You can't just abandon family." Emma's stomach twisted, but she also felt an unexpected calm. She had expected this. For years, everyone had assumed Emma would take care of everything, quietly, invisibly. They didn't know the cost it had taken from her. Still, amid the storm of accusations, one message stood out, and it brought tears to Emma's eyes: Aunt Carol. "Emma," the message read, "I had no idea what you've been carrying. I'm so sorry. You have done more than anyone could ever ask. I'm proud of you for finally choosing yourself. If you need anything, please call me." Emma stared at that message, a small but powerful reminder that not everyone in her family was blind to her pain. Throughout the day, Emma continued her mission, calling doctors' offices to inform them she would no longer handle billing, emailing pharmacies to remove her name from Linda's prescription accounts. Every time she said the words, "I will no longer be responsible," her resolve grew stronger. For years, she had believed that her mother's survival depended solely on her, but now she saw that she had to save herself first. By the time the sun set, Emma was exhausted but lighter than she had felt in years. She looked around her apartment, small, modest, but entirely hers, and for the first time in a long time, she felt free, no longer bound by obligations that were never truly appreciated, no longer tethered to a cycle that was draining her life away. As she stood up and stretched, she walked over to her desk and picked up the acceptance letter from Austin Community College's nursing program, which she had hidden away for months, afraid to even hope. Now, as she ran her fingers over the crisp paper, she let herself imagine a future where she was no longer just surviving, but actually living the life she had always dreamed of. Emma knew there would be more backlash, more guilt-tripping calls, but tonight she allowed herself to breathe, and to hope again. This was her first real step toward freedom, and she was determined to keep walking forward. By the time September rolled around, Emma Carter was officially a nursing student again, walking through the wide glass doors of Austin Community College's Health Sciences building with a mixture of excitement and nerves humming in her chest. It had been 5 years since she had last sat in a classroom, and though her mind was sharp from years of managing complex tech projects and navigating the intricacies of the healthcare system for her mother, part of her wondered if she still had what it took to succeed. But as she walked through the hallways, past students bustling between classes, Emma realized she was ready to focus on herself, to chase the dream she had buried for so long under layers of sacrifice and obligation. Balancing school with work wasn't going to be easy. But Emma had a plan. She had scaled back her tech consulting work, cutting down to a select group of long-term clients who understood her situation and were willing to work around her new schedule. She had also brought on Sofia Perez, a bright and eager marketing student from the college, as her part-time assistant. Sofia had been a lifesaver from day one, handling client emails, managing updates for websites Emma maintained, and even taking over smaller projects that allowed Emma to focus more on her coursework. "You've got to focus on nursing school," Sofia had told her cheerfully during one of their first meetings. "You take care of the people, I'll take care of the tech." Emma had never realized how good it would feel to finally ask for help and receive it without judgment. With Sofia handling much of the administrative work, Emma found herself able to pour her energy into classes, anatomy, pharmacology, patient care, and surprisingly, she thrived. Her instructors, impressed with her focus and dedication, encouraged her to speak up in class, and soon Emma became known as one of the most thoughtful and prepared students in the program. Though the course load was demanding, Emma loved every minute of it, the kind of love that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Still, old habits were hard to break. There were moments, late at night after clinical rotations or during long study sessions, when Emma would catch herself worrying about her mother. Was Linda managing her appointments? Was she taking her medications? But then Emma would remember the cold laughter she had heard in that live stream, the cruel words her mother had spoken, and she would push the guilt aside. "I've done enough," she would whisper to herself like a mantra. And slowly, it was beginning to stick. Her tech clients, though reduced in number, were also a source of quiet pride. With Sofia's help, Emma focused on higher value contracts, companies and startups who respected her boundaries and were willing to pay for quality. "You're killing it," Marcus Lee, one of her longtime clients and mentors, told her during a video call. "Honestly, I don't know how you're managing both tech and nursing school, but I'm impressed. And if you ever need to drop work to focus on school, say the word." Hearing that vote of confidence, that her professional value stood on its own, meant everything. Emma also found herself growing closer to Elaine Thompson, one of the top tech consultants in Austin, who had taken an interest in Emma's work. After hearing Emma's story, Elaine had invited her out for coffee and told her, "You know, Emma, resilience like yours is rare in this industry. If you ever want to come back full-time when you finish nursing, I'll have a place for you on my team." The offer was generous, but Emma smiled as she thanked her. "I think I've finally figured out what I want to do," she said simply, and Elaine had smiled knowingly. Balancing two demanding worlds was not without its challenges. There were weeks when assignments piled up, when tech deadlines overlapped with nursing exams, and when Emma found herself running on little more than caffeine and determination. But unlike the past 5 years, these challenges felt like her own choices, not burdens forced upon her by someone else. And that made all the difference. As weeks turned into months, Emma began to rebuild her identity. She was no longer just the dutiful daughter holding her life together while quietly falling apart. She was a woman reclaiming her future. The day she received her first clinical evaluation, marked excellent, with glowing comments about her bedside manner, she cried. But this time they were tears of joy, not pain. For the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to imagine a future beyond caregiving, a future where she was a nurse, helping others because she chose to, not because she was trapped in a role of obligation. She imagined herself working in a busy the way she had once dreamed, making a difference in people's lives while still running a lean tech consulting business on the side. It would be hard work, but it would be her work, built on her own terms. Most of all, Emma felt hopeful, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to embrace in so long. Hope for a career that inspired her. Hope for meaningful relationships built on respect and reciprocity, not obligation. Hope for a life that belonged to her. And as she walked home from class one evening, the sun setting over the Austin skyline, she realized with a quiet smile that she was no longer living for someone else, she was finally living for herself. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Emma had expected it, but when the texts and calls from her family started pouring in, the sheer force of their anger still took her by surprise. Aunt Lisa was the first to reach out. Her message sharp and accusing. Emma, I can't believe you're doing this to your own mother. After everything she's been through? She needs you. Then came Uncle Rob, who added, Emma, family doesn't turn its back on family. You're all she has. Each message felt like a slap. But unlike before, Emma didn't crumble. Instead, she let the words sit on her screen, unanswered, while she focused on finishing her pharmacology assignment. Still, the pressure built. Lisa called next, her voice tight with disapproval when Emma finally picked up. Emma, I don't know what's gotten into you, but you need to think about what you're doing. Your mother is struggling, and you're off playing nurse and computer girl like you don't have responsibilities. Emma took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. Aunt Lisa, I've spent 5 years taking care of Mom, 5 years paying for everything. Putting my life on hold. And did she ever thank me? No. Instead, she laughed about me to all of you behind my back. There was a long pause on the other end. That was a misunderstanding, Lisa said weakly. She was just venting. Emma's voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. No, it wasn't. I heard every word, and so did everyone else. I have the recording, remember? Lisa hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. But before she could say more, Emma added, and for the record, I'm not abandoning her. I'm just refusing to be her unpaid nurse and bank. If she needs help, she can ask the rest of you now. The conversation ended shortly after that, and though Emma's heart pounded, she felt a sense of relief for having finally said what needed to be said. But the family wasn't done yet. Over the next few days, cousins and distant relatives chimed in, some to defend Linda, others just to gossip. Only Aunt Carol remained quietly supportive, sending Emma messages of encouragement. You're stronger than you think. Emma, you deserve to live your life too. Then, just as Emma thought the worst of it had passed, her mother showed up at her apartment. Emma was on her way out to meet a tech client when she saw Linda standing at her door, leaning heavily on her cane, her face pale but eyes sharp with anger. Emma, Linda said sharply, we need to talk. Emma stared at her for a moment, heart racing. There's nothing to talk about. Mom, she replied firmly, I told you I'm done. Linda's lips thinned. I can't afford my medications. My doctor's office called and said my insurance is messed up. This is your fault. Emma crossed her arms, holding her ground. No, Mom, this is the result of you depending on me for everything and not appreciating it. You said I was pathetic. You laughed at me, so now it's up to you to figure this out, or maybe Aunt Lisa and Uncle Rob can help. Her mother's eyes filled with frustrated tears. You can't do this to me. I'm your mother. After everything I've done for you, raised you alone, worked myself to the bone, and now you're just throwing me away? Emma took a deep breath, her voice surprisingly calm. You're right. You did a lot for me when I was younger. I've spent 5 years repaying that, and then some. But respect goes both ways. Mom, and you don't get to tear me down while taking everything I've worked for. I'm not your backup plan anymore. Linda's face twisted in anger. So, that's it? You're abandoning me? You'll regret this when I'm gone. Emma blinked back the sting of those words, but she didn't let them pierce as deeply as they once would have. I won't regret standing up for myself, she said quietly. I'm sorry you're struggling, but I won't let you drag me down with you. Linda stood there for a moment longer, clearly waiting for Emma to cave. But when Emma only stepped aside to lock her door, her mother let out a huff of frustration and hobbled back to her car. Emma watched her drive off, a mixture of sadness and relief churning in her chest. She had never wanted to hurt her mother, but she also knew that continuing to sacrifice herself would destroy her. Later that evening, as Emma sat on her couch with her laptop, an unexpected call lit up her screen. It was Uncle Rob. She hesitated, debating whether to answer, but curiosity won out. Emma, Rob began, his voice softer than before. I saw the breakdown you sent. I didn't realize how much you've been handling. Emma's chest tightened slightly, but she kept her tone neutral. I've been doing it alone for a long time. Rob sighed. Look, I don't agree with how this is going down, but I get it now. Maybe I should have asked more questions before. Emma felt a small flicker of gratitude. I appreciate that, Uncle Rob. Really? I'll talk to your mom, he added, but I hope you're doing okay. I am, Emma said, and for the first time in a long time, she meant it. When she hung up, Emma leaned back on the couch and allowed herself a deep breath. The fight wasn't over, but she had stood her ground. And for the first time, her family was starting to see her side. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and for now, that was enough. 2 months after Emma's painful but necessary break from her mother, something unexpected happened, a reminder that while part of her life was breaking down, another part was rising stronger than ever. An email from Marcus Lee, one of her long-term tech clients and mentor, popped into her inbox with the subject line, "Nomination, Resilience in Tech Award, you deserve this." Emma blinked at the screen, unsure if she was reading it right. As she opened it, her heart began to race. "Emma, I wanted to let you know I've nominated you for the Resilience in Tech Award at the Austin Tech Business Association's annual gala. I hope you don't mind. You've inspired so many of us by how you've handled impossible challenges while keeping your business afloat. You deserve recognition." Emma sat frozen for a moment, staring at the words. She had spent so long surviving behind closed doors, never imagining anyone noticed the effort it took to juggle her mother's care while maintaining a business. The idea that someone not only noticed but thought she was worthy of public recognition brought tears to her eyes, but this time, they were tears of validation and pride, not exhaustion. When the night of the awards ceremony arrived, Emma almost backed out. The thought of standing in a crowded room, accepting an award for resilience, felt surreal, as if she were living someone else's life. But Sophia Perez, her assistant and now close friend, had insisted she go. "Emma, this is your moment," Sophia had said firmly. "For once, let people see how amazing you are." Emma found herself standing in front of the full-length mirror in her small apartment, adjusting the simple but elegant dark blue dress she had splurged on, the first thing she had bought for herself in years. For once, she wasn't dressing to care for someone else or to attend yet another exhausting medical meeting, she was dressing for herself. For a night that honored her hard work. The event was held in a glittering downtown Austin hotel ballroom, filled with the city's top entrepreneurs, developers, and tech professionals. As Emma mingled nervously, she was surprised by how many people came up to her, fellow consultants, clients, even competitors, all praising her work and expressing their admiration for how she had handled personal struggles while running a respected business. For the first time, Emma felt like she belonged in that room. Like all those years of quiet sacrifice and perseverance had built something real and strong. When the moment finally arrived, and her name was called, and the Resilience in Tech Award goes to Emma Carter, a wave of shock rolled through her as applause filled the room. She stood slowly, her hands trembling slightly, but as Sophia gave her an encouraging thumbs up from across the room, Emma walked to the stage, her head held high. Taking the microphone, she paused for a breath, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Thank you," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I honestly didn't expect this. And I'm honored. For a long time, I worked quietly behind the scenes, balancing tech work with family responsibilities, thinking no one noticed. But what I've learned, what I want to share, is that resilience isn't just about pushing through hard times. It's about knowing when to stand up for yourself, when to say, enough, and choose your own future." The room was silent, listening. As Emma continued, "I've spent the last year learning how to do that, how to rebuild my life. Not just for others, but for me. And I want to say to anyone out there carrying invisible burdens, you deserve to be seen. You deserve to choose yourself." As she stepped down to renewed applause, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years, pride in herself. Unclouded by guilt or obligation. She was no longer just the woman struggling behind closed doors, she was a woman who had fought for her life and won. Emma was still riding the high from her award ceremony when, just a week later, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, interrupting her quiet evening of studying and catching up on client emails. She hesitated for a moment before answering. On the other end, Uncle Rob's voice, unusually serious, greeted her. "Emma, it's Rob. I'm calling from the hospital." Emma's heart dropped instantly, a familiar wave of panic tightening her chest. "It's your mom," Rob continued. "She had some kind of bad reaction to her new medication. They think it might have been caused by her insurance not covering the brand she normally takes. She collapsed at home and hit her head. She's awake now, but she's been asking for you." Emma was silent, gripping the phone tightly. The old part of her wanted to jump into action, to drop everything and rush to her mother's side. But then she remembered all too clearly her mother's words from that dinner. The laughter, the disdain. She took a slow breath. Is she stable? Emma asked, her voice calm but distant. Yeah, for now. They're keeping her overnight for observation. But the doctors have a lot of questions about her medical history. And she's refusing to answer. She keeps saying, my daughter handles all that. Emma closed her eyes, leaning back against her couch. Of course, even now, when she had cut ties, her mother still expected her to swoop in and fix everything. I'm in the middle of preparing for an exam, Emma said carefully. I can't drop everything, but I'll come by after I'm done. There was a long pause on Rob's end before he replied. All right, I'll tell them you're coming. When Emma arrived at the hospital later that evening, the nurses at the desk gave her the room number without question, clearly used to her name being associated with Linda's care for years. As she stepped into the sterile, overly bright room, she found her mother sitting up in bed, looking surprisingly alert for someone who had been rushed to the ER. Uncle Rob sat in a chair nearby, glancing up when Emma entered, offering her a tense nod. Well, look who finally decided to show up. Linda snapped, her voice filled with bitterness the moment she saw Emma. Too busy living your big important life to care about your own mother? Emma set her bag down, keeping her expression neutral. I'm here now, Mom. I hear you had a reaction to your meds. Linda's eyes narrowed. Yeah, because my insurance won't pay for what I need anymore. You think this is easy? You think I can just manage all of this by myself? Emma took a deep breath. I think you've been managing just fine when you were calling me pathetic behind my back, she said quietly, but firmly. Linda stiffened, her cheeks reddening. Oh, so you're still on that? Still twisting everything I said? I don't need to twist anything. Mom, I heard every word. You made it very clear how you feel about me. And you've made it clear that you expect me to take care of everything while you belittle me. Emma's voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. Uncle Rob shifted uncomfortably. What's she talking about, Linda? He asked, frowning. Emma sent us that breakdown of everything she's been paying for. But now I'm hearing there's more to this? Linda waved a hand dismissively, refusing to meet his eyes. She's overreacting. Emma shook her head. I'm not. I've been carrying you for 5 years. I gave up nursing school, my savings, relationships, everything. And I did it without complaint until I heard what you really think of me. The room fell into an awkward silence. Rob looked back and forth between them, clearly realizing there was far more happening than he had known. Finally, Linda spoke again, her voice softer but still defensive. So, what? You're just going to abandon me? After everything I did for you growing up? Emma's eyes softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. You raised me, yes, and I've spent 5 years repaying that. But this, she gestured around the hospital room. This cycle where I give everything and you give nothing but criticism? It has to end, Mom. I'm not saying I don't care. But I'm not sacrificing my life anymore. Linda looked away, her mouth set in a hard line. Rob finally broke the silence, shaking his head. I think you two need to work this out, he said. But Emma, I get why you're doing what you're doing. Maybe I didn't before, but I do now. Emma blinked in surprise. Of all people, she hadn't expected Rob to say that. She stood, gathering her bag. I'll leave my number with the nurse in case they need medical history. But after that, I'm done here. She paused at the door, looking back one last time. I hope you'll be okay, Mom, but it's time for me to be okay too. As Emma walked down the hospital hallway, her chest felt tight, but there was a lightness in her step, a sense of closure. For so long, she had believed she owed her mother her life. But now, she realized, she owed herself one too. And as the hospital doors slid open, letting in the night air, Emma stepped into her future, free. The weeks that followed Emma's final hospital visit with her mother brought a kind of quiet Emma hadn't known in years, but this time, it wasn't the suffocating silence of loneliness or isolation. It was the calm of freedom. For the first time since she had been thrust into the role of caretaker, Emma woke up each day knowing that her time belonged to her. There were no early morning phone calls from doctors, no frantic battles with insurance companies, No last-minute pharmacy runs for medications she could barely afford. Her life was her own again. And though there were moments when the old guilt crept in, when she wondered if she was being heartless, those feelings were slowly being replaced by something new: peace. Emma threw herself into nursing school with renewed determination. Now that she wasn't constantly drained by her mother's needs, she was thriving in her classes, surprising even herself with how much knowledge she still retained from her earlier years in the program. Her instructors began to take notice, often calling on her during clinical rotations, trusting her instincts and skill. One day, after successfully administering an IV under the close watch of her clinical supervisor, Emma was told, "You've got a natural touch for this. Emma, patients are going to be lucky to have you as a nurse." The words lit a warmth in her chest. The kind of validation she used to crave but never receive from her mother, and now, finally, she was getting it from herself and her own efforts. Her tech consulting work continued in a more streamlined, manageable way, thanks to Sophia, who had quickly become more than just an assistant. She was a friend. A quiet source of encouragement on the hardest days. Sophia took over most of the client communications, allowing Emma to focus on high-value projects that brought in stable income without overwhelming her. "You've got this balanced so well now," Sophia said one afternoon as they wrapped up a client meeting. "I hope you know how impressive that is." Emma smiled, realizing that the praise no longer felt foreign. She was starting to believe in her own strength. Her relationship with Aunt Carol also grew stronger. They began meeting for coffee regularly, and Carol often asked about Emma's classes and future plans, genuinely interested in her life. "I'm proud of you, you know," Carol said one day, squeezing Emma's hand across the cafe table. "You've been through hell and back, but you're standing tall." Not many people would have the courage to step away from what was hurting them, especially family. Hearing that from Carol, someone who had seen it all, made Emma's throat tighten. But this time with gratitude, not sadness. Even her relationship with Uncle Rob shifted after their conversation at the hospital. Though he never directly apologized, his tone was softer now, and he seemed to understand what Emma had endured. He reached out occasionally to give updates about Linda. Though Emma kept her responses brief and polite, she had learned to set boundaries without guilt. A lesson hard won but essential. As the nursing semester progressed, Emma received an email that brought an unexpected smile to her face, an invitation to speak on a panel for women in tech who had transitioned to healthcare careers. Hosted by the Austin Tech Association. The fact that someone wanted to hear her story, to recognize her as an example of resilience and reinvention, felt like a full-circle moment. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was growing, leading, and inspiring others. At home, her small apartment felt more like a sanctuary than ever. The Resilience in Tech award sat proudly on her bookshelf, next to her stack of nursing textbooks, a reminder of how far she had come. Some nights, as she sat by her window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Emma would think about her mother, about how different things could have been if Linda had valued her, had treated her with love instead of resentment. But those thoughts no longer broke her. She had made peace with her decision, knowing that saving herself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Emma's life now was far from easy, balancing classes, work, and building a future from scratch, but it was hers, built on her terms, with pride and purpose. And as she walked across campus one bright morning, textbooks in hand, she realized she wasn't carrying the weight of the past anymore. She was walking into a future she had fought to reclaim, and for the first time in years, she felt whole. The story of Emma teaches us a powerful lesson about self-worth, boundaries, and reclaiming one's life. Sometimes, even those we love can take advantage of our kindness. And it's okay, even necessary, to say enough. True strength is not just in caring for others but in knowing when to care for yourself. Emma's journey shows that choosing your own happiness and dreams is not selfish, it's an act of survival and empowerment. By standing up for herself, Emma learns that respect, love, and value must be mutual. And we all deserve to live for ourselves.